What is up, everybody? We are back. It is Mock Draft Monday, the first one of the offseason. First one since last draft that I've done. I've been a little slow in the mock drafts. Last time I started them like week 10 of the NFL season, but this season I did not. Maybe it was because I was a little more engaged with the NFL season. Last year I was checked out, but nonetheless, we're here, Mock Draft Monday. Since this is the first one of the offseason, I'm going to do a fully predictive mock draft. And what I mean by that is I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. Not going to do any too crazy of trades. I will have one trade in there. I'm not going to make any crazy picks. I'm not going to do any extenuating circumstances. I think I'm going to do several mock drafts throughout the offseason where I'll be able to explore different teams trading up to one, different teams trading up to two, et cetera, et cetera. But for this one, I'm going to do as best as I can as predicting each individual pick. Now, I say that, and I just had a podcast episode about a month ago with Matthew Burwald where we predicted all 32 NFL starting quarterbacks. And that was an honest prediction, too, and it's only been a couple of weeks since then. But as you'll see early on in this, I feel like we may be nearing a point where I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the same list of quarterbacks that I predicted then. But we'll get into it. You'll see what I'm talking about right off the bat. And Tennessee brings up that conversation. So in that podcast episode, spoiler alert, I had Tennessee starting Cam Ward week 1, which if they were going for positional need and the best at that position, quarterback is their most needed position. They have a need. Cam Ward is by far the best guy from everything I've read and seen. I'm not an excellent evaluator. I think Shedeur Sanders looks pretty good as well. But nonetheless, I think that the Tennessee Titans, their GM, has come out and said, we're not going to pass up on a generational talent, inferring that we're not going to pass up on a generational talent at a different position of need just because we need a quarterback. Do I believe that's a good strategy? No. If they believe in Cam Ward, I think they draft Cam Ward. Even if they believe Abdul Carter is going to be an all-pro, if they're going to believe Cam Ward could be a Pro Bowl quarterback, they need a quarterback. That's assuming they don't end up with a free agent like Sam Darnold or whoever else, one of these highly paid guys. The problem with that is teams don't believe what I believe, and I am predicting what they're going to do, not what I would do. And so I have Tennessee trading out of this pick. And the reason why I do is because I think those in this spot, the two generational talents they could be talking about are Penn State edge rusher Abdul Carter and Colorado corner / wide receiver Travis Hunter. If they were to trade too far back, let's say the Jets wanted to move from 7-1, my New York Jets wanted to move from 7-1, they'd have to give up a lot, first of all. But second of all, now you're looking at a maybe seventh overall prospect. Maybe they end up with the Tet McMillan or a Will Johnson, which, not to say they can't be great players, right? The problem with that is I don't think you're then drafting a quote generational talent. And for you to be able to trade out of this spot, you have to guarantee to get one of those. You assume Cleveland's going to take one. You assume whoever you trade with is going after a quarterback. So the furthest back you could trade is 3 to realistically get one of those. Maybe 4 if you were assured that 2 teams in front of you were taking quarterbacks. At 3, you have a team in the New York Giants who desperately need a quarterback. And I think as time goes on in the offseason, I just feel more and more, even though I had them drafting and starting Shedeur Sanders in that quarterback prediction episode, it just feels like they're going for the big fish and they're willing to trade picks to get up to 1. Now, if I'm Tennessee and what that deal looks like as I hit the trade button here and select the teams, if you're going back to like 7, for example, for the Jets or 6 for the Raiders or whoever else, moving up to get that quarterback kind of in that, later in the top 10 range, I think you need at least a first. I think given where the Giants and the Titans are, I could realistically see a situation where they give their second, the Giants give up their second, which is the 34th overall pick, which is a really good pick. I mean, that's basically a late first round pick, right? It's right just as early as you can get pretty much in the second round. And then maybe a second or a third next year. I could see that being the package and not having to give up a 1 because you're still getting one of those generational talents. And so that's what we're going to do here. And I have the New York Giants taking the aforementioned Cam Ward, who, even though I believe in Shedeur Sanders, I think Cam Ward has a significantly higher ceiling. And at the end of the day, that's what teams are looking for. Cleveland at pick 2. And I will say before I move on, I think drafting Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders for the New York Giants buys their regime time. Even though I know rumors about them getting Matthew Stafford surely would as well if they won. If they didn't win, that would get them out sooner. Where the, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll, they've now been around for Dable, should I say? They've now been around for a few years. It looked like they could have been fired last offseason. If they don't get one of these young quarterbacks and they just get like a bridge like a Russell Wilson, it's going to be very easy to fire them next offseason. You draft a guy like Cam Ward, you probably want to give him time with the offensive system, especially if he shows flashes, which I think he definitely could, especially with Malik Neighbors as a target. Cleveland at pick two, I think Myles Garrett asking for a trade makes this pick a little easier in my mind. I probably would have gone Abdul Carter anyway, but now you have one of the best defenders in the league asking out. What better way to replace him than the best overall talent in the draft that also happens to play the same position? I think Abdul Carter could be a wrecking force on the outside of a defensive line. Cleveland certainly needs help in that category with or without Myles Garrett, and so Abdul Carter would be a great addition there. And now we get to Tennessee, as I mentioned. If there's two premium talents at the top of this board, Travis Hunter is one of them. I think they end up playing him more at wide receiver than we're giving credit for. I think he's a better corner than a wide receiver, but at the end of the day, I could easily see him being, especially early on, being really involved on the offensive side of the ball. And you kind of see from there how much he can handle. But he's an exciting prospect. The athleticism is insane. Pick four, the New England Patriots, probably the most normal pick so far. At the end of the day, the New England Patriots need help on that offensive line. And whether that's a tackle or whether that's an interior offensive lineman, I don't frankly care. Drake May got beat up a lot last year, and I think if you want to prove that he's a franchise quarterback, you need to keep him protected and you need to get him weapons. Pick four, there's weapons available, right? You could go Tet McMillan, you could go Tyler Warren, you could go Ashton Jeanty in theory. You could, draft some of these wide receivers further down and make a Egbuka and such. At the end of the day, I think the best option here is the tackle. You're going to find weapons deeper in this draft, I think. And even though this is a deep offensive line class, Will Campbell out of LSU is really an elite talent on the offensive side of the ball. I don't know where they're going to play him on the line, but you need to keep Drake May upright, and that's why I take Will Campbell here, and I think that's where they go. I should say, too, by the way, if the Patriots at all sense that Shedeur Sanders could drop to 7 for the Jets, which we'll get to that soon, I could easily see them trading out of this pick. They've been known to spite the Jets, and maybe that was more when Bill Belichick was in charge. But I think back a few years ago when the Jets had the 13th pick, they did a pick swap when they got Aaron Rodgers to move back to 15, which is that was the Packers pick at the time. Packers drafted at 13. The Patriots had the 14th pick. Jets needed a tackle. The Patriots trade out of that pick, give it to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who then went and drafted their offensive tackle, who I'm forgetting the name of. It wasn't Paris Johnson. It was shoot. Anyway, their tackle that is now had his ups and downs, but nonetheless, the Jets were spited out of that pick, ended up going an edge rusher, which I think was kind of a panic pick from then GM Joe Douglas. So if the Patriots sense that Shedeur Sanders could drop to 7, I could easily see them, trying to swing a deal with New Orleans or whoever else to try to move up and make sure they secure that quarterback before the Jets get to him. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. The Jacksonville Jaguars here. I think they take the best defensive player available, even though they bring in Kellen Moore, who's an offensive mind, and I think he would have fun with a guy like Tyler Warren. I think he could also stand to improve the offensive line at the tackle position, especially. Their biggest need is on defense. Trayvon Walker has shown flashes. You hope for a little more from him, but Mason Graham is a top flight prospect in that interior defensive line position. I could even see him playing some outside and some run defenses. I think he's going to be an impact player for them, and at the end of the day, it's a position of need and it's an important position. So I see that that's where they would go. Pick six, the Las Vegas Raiders. This one is a tough one for me because at the end of the day, at quarterback is where I find the most intrigue, and Shedeur Sanders is still on the board. However, new minority owner Tom Brady, I could easily see coming in and wanting to make a splash, wanting to bring in a veteran. Shedeur is the type of guy that I could see starting right away. But any young quarterback, I think, could benefit from waiting a little bit, unless you're Jaden Daniels and you're going to be an elite quarterback right away. Even a guy like CJ Stroud, who had a really good rookie season, I think benching him for the first couple games may not have been the worst thing in the world in retrospect. Now, he had a great season, very good season, let's say. But He's come crashing back down to earth a little bit in year two. Not an awful season, but not a good one, really. Um, so at the end of the day, I could see the Raiders going with a guy like Russell Wilson, who I predicted to be their starting quarterback in that prediction episode. As I mentioned, go watch that full video. And then still drafting a guy like Shador Sanders to back him up. If Russ wins the job, he keeps the job. He starts for as long as he's effective. Maybe Shador waits out the whole year. But Russell Wilson's going to be relatively cheap. I believe he's still getting money from the Denver Broncos. You could draft a guy like Shador Sanders. That being said, I could also see getting a guy like Ted McMillan to replace Devontae Adams, who left at the trade deadline last season. And, you have him, you have Jacoby Myers, and you have Brock Bowers. Now you got a real trio of offensive weapons for Russell Wilson, whoever that veteran quarterback is. At the end of the day, I think Shador Sanders is the pick here. And unless they get a guy like Sam Darnold, I think they could still be in the market for a young quarterback, no matter what veteran quarterback they get. I think Sam Darnold in this scenario maybe makes more sense for the Titans, given that they didn't take a quarterback. But nonetheless, I'm going to have them taking Shador Sanders from Colorado. I could also see Dion being a guy who loves Shador being in Vegas, right? The weather, the stadium, the fans who are still developing there, or flying in from Oakland, or LA, I guess. But nonetheless, being in the room with Tom Brady and under the tutelage of Pete Carroll, I think that's not a bad situation for Shador to be in, and I think Dion could really be on board with that, which would really help the situation. The Jets at 7, probably hoping that that Shador fell to them. Certainly, at the end of the day, this pick is not as easy as I wanted it to be. And when I was making my notes, I did have them taking Tedoroa McMillan, wide receiver out of Arizona, just because they're losing Devontae Adams. They still have Garrett Wilson, obviously, and I think they might end up paying Garrett Wilson this offseason. Behind that, it's Xavier Gibson, it's Malachi Corley, it's a bunch of guys. Alan Lazard is going to get cut. It's a bunch of guys who I think are best served as a wide receiver 3 or 4. There's no wide receiver 2 on this team. And so they need another offensive weapon, whether that's Ted McMillan, whether that's Tyler Warren, I don't know. However, DJ Reed is a free agent this offseason. I could see them getting a corner like Will Johnson to pair with Sauce Gardner and have kind of elite 1-2 punch on that back end. Will Johnson feels like a Muji kind of guy, their new GM coming in from Denver, who loved Pat Surtain and the defense they had there, especially in the secondary. He also feels like he could be a Aaron Glenn kind of guy, right? Hard nosed defense, real good cover corner. And so even though I had Tet McMillan in my notes, maybe that was a little bit of a hope. I'm gonna select Will Johnson here. And like I said, he pairs with Sauce Gardner. I think if he plays well, could be a real impact for this team. Now, Ted McMillan falls a little bit here, and I could easily see the Panthers going that way, but I think edge is more of a position of need right now. I think Bryce Young is still in development. You could argue that getting him another weapon would be helpful, but at the end of the day, I think Jalen Walker is such a great fit. I'm seeing him mocked all over the place to Carolina. I think that's just a real great pick for them in terms of an impact player on the defensive side of the ball. And I think you could argue is more of a position, significantly more of a position of need than wide receiver at this point. The Saints at pick 9. Listen, a lot of offensive skill positions on the board, and and part of me really wants to draft one here. Um, at the end of the day, it's a question of which one would you believe that Kellen Moore would have more fun with? Is it Tet McMillan or is it Tyler Warren? And even though I think Tet McMillan might have a higher ceiling from an offensive output perspective, I think Tyler Warren's a fun prospect. I don't. I gotta go. I gotta go Tyler Warren here. I just have to. I mean, him and that Kellen Moore offense would be fun. Derek Carr, throw it to him, and Chris Olave if he could stop throwing him hospital balls. And then you have Alvin Kamara to the backfield. I think that would be fun. Chicago at pick 10. They need to keep. They need to keep Caleb Williams upright, and that's exactly what Ben Johnson is coming in to do. He comes from an offensive system in Detroit where they had offensive linemen galore. Right, they had probably 6 starters that they felt comfortable with. And so I think Kelvin Banks is the pick here. I don't know whether he ends up sticking at tackle. I could see Membu being a pick there too. I don't know whether Banks sticks at tackle or he ends up moving inside. Either way, I think they need help at pretty much every offensive line position. And so I think that's an easy pick for them there. Pick 11. I originally had Will Johnson here going to the 49ers. Unfortunately, he's obviously not on the board here. So the question is, where do we go? And hmm, I'm going to go Michael Williams here. I think they need another impact defender. I could easily see them going to tackle Arnaud Membu in that 49ers offensive line, opposite of what's his name, Williams. I could see that. I could see them getting Ted McMillan because they're going to move it on from Debo Samuel. Now you add him to a wide receiver room that features Juwan Jennings and features Brandon Ayuk and obviously Ricky Pearsall. But I think they have to add a defensive impact player. And I think they just didn't hit home enough. And I think we saw with the Philadelphia Eagles, who really showed out in terms of their defensive line performance, adding an edge like Michael Williams would be a lot of fun in San Francisco, especially with Robert Saleh back. Robert Saleh is going to have fun with Michael Williams. I'm telling you. Next at pick 12, listen, we've seen it mocked over and over again. Ashton Jeanty to the Dallas Cowboys. And the question here for me is not whether that pick makes the most sense. The question is whether Jerry Jones has the balls to pass up a guy like Ted McMillan. And because that wasn't an option in my original notes, um, I'm now debating that here. Both positions are a big position of need, but I just can't see them steering away from a talent like Janty. He's going to come in and he's going to rush for 1,500 yards, man. He's going to be elite right away. And so I can't see them passing this up. The Miami Dolphins here, they need help on that offensive line, especially at the tackle position. Membu's a guy who I think has elite athleticism and is going to be a really good impact player for whatever team drafts him. And unfortunately, as a Jets fan, I don't want the Dolphins to draft him, but I think he makes the most sense as a pick here. You went defense last year with Chop Robinson. I think you added that offensive line and helped keep Tua upright. The Colts, I originally had them taking Michael Williams, so I think this is where kind of my notes complete the full circle. I think that we stop the slide here on Ted McMillan. Adding, even though Totoro and McMillan is not necessarily a position of need, or I should say, wide receiver is not necessarily a position of need. You have some elite talent already. I think Michael Pittman is a little overrated, but is still a very good wide receiver. You drafted Adonai Mitchell last year. If you believe you have the quarterback, which I'm not sure they believe they have the quarterback, I think wide receiver and offensive line are two places you keep investing talent in until it works. And at the end of the day, if you add Ted McMillan to that offensive, skill group alongside Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce and whoever else, I think he could be the best wide receiver on the field. And that's hard to get at this pick in the draft at pick 14. And so even though a defensive lineman is enticing, even though they probably need help in the secondary more, I just can't see that talent passing by pick 14. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. The Atlanta Falcons at pick 15, for me, after spending their first years and years and years in a row drafting Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson, and now, of course, the quarterback, who I'm blanking on the name of, but regardless, after spending how many years drafting a Penix, there it is, drafting offensive skill position players, I think here they have to go defense. And I think Raheem Morris can't resist a guy like Mike Green coming out of Marshall to be that impact defensive lineman. I think they were hoping Matthew Judon really provided that impact, and while he had a good season, I think you can clearly see the talent wasn't there on the defensive line. And maybe if they went a guy like Jared Verse or Laiatu Latu last draft, I mean, I know now you in retrospect, Kirk Cousins was awful, so I don't hate the draft of Michael Penix, especially with hindsight in our pocket. Only because of hindsight, because Kirk Cousins didn't plan out well. But I mean, I just talked about throwing assets at wide receiver. I guess that's what they did. They threw assets at quarterback until it worked. I don't know. I'm still salty about that. About them paying Kirk Cousins and then drafting Penix. Just don't pay Kirk Cousins then. Anyway, not the point of this. Next, I think this kind of sets a run of edge just because where we're at in the draft with these teams that are up and the amount of talent in this middle of the first round at the edge position. I think the Cardinals go James Pierce Jr. here, provide an impact off the defensive line. They certainly needed that. They certainly needed to get home in a lot more plays than they did last year. Same for the Bengals. I mean, Trey Hendrickson is certainly, I think, looking for a paycheck, But adding another defensive lineman alongside of him will even help his production even more. And Shamar Stewart, I think, could be that guy here from Texas A&M. Seattle at pick 18. I mean, I'm not stopping the edge. No, I'm just kidding. I am stopping the edge. I think they need help on the offensive line between injuries and retirements and whatever else on that offensive line. They could certainly use a guy like Josh Simmons who could play tackle for them, who could move inside for them. I think really this draft is chock full of guys who I think are likely to pivot inside for one reason or another. Whether that's the arm length, whether that's the ability to handle these bendy kind of defensive linemen. Um, I think Josh Simmons is that type of guy that you could play at tackler, you could move inside to guard, and they wouldn't hate it. I think he's an interesting prospect for the Seattle offensive line and for Mike McDonald to kind of really help that offense because it needs it. Um, Next up, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think there's a scenario where Chris Godwin is back. I think there's also a scenario where you have a new offensive coordinator and you want to make it as easy for him as possible, and that's providing more weapons. And if Chris Godwin is not back, you have Jalen McMillan, who did well last season, but I don't think they're expecting him to take a huge leap. Mike Evans is getting older. I think you could add another offensive weapon in that room. And a guy like Luther Burden out of Missouri is an interesting prospect. He's a guy who adds an elite talent to that room, which is something that I think could be an added bonus, even though not a desperate need. All right, next up we have pick 20 with the Denver Broncos. Back to the defensive line. Well, I think Walter Nolan is a great pick for Sean Payton's defense. You saw John Franklin Myers kind of play a similar role last offseason that I think Walter Nolan could play. I think he's a really just an intriguing prospect. And so adding him here to that defensive line, which was already very good, and I think he could even improve that playing on the inside, I think it's a fun pick for the Denver Broncos. Pick 21 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is, a pick that I actually think the Denver Broncos could have made. I'm going to add a wide receiver to this wide receiver room. I think they end up going veteran with the quarterback, whether that's bringing back Russell Wilson, whether that's bringing back Justin Fields, whether that's bringing in Aaron Rodgers. I don't know. But adding another wide receiver in that room is a desperate need. You have Pickens and pretty much no one else, in my opinion. So adding a guy like Egbuka, who I think it will also help for the fact that I think Pittsburgh has been on a run of guys, and Mel Kiper Jr. pointed this out, been on a run of wide receivers who were kind of divas, right? Going back to Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant and Juju Smith-Schuster, and now to Kenny Pickett. Nope, that's not his name. George Pickens. I think they could really use a guy like Egbuka to strengthen that locker room too. So the talent is there. I think it's an underrated talent, especially this late in the first. And I think the locker room characteristics are there that Tomlin's going to fall in love with. I think that's a lot of fun. The Chargers, I think maybe could have also benefited from taking Egbuka to really pair with McConkey. I think they needed an offensive weapon. Colston Loveland, really that typical tight end kind of inline kind of guy, but could also play some. If he could protect, he could is a good receiver as well. I think he's a great pick there. Michigan guy, right, from Jim Harbaugh's ties. I think that's makes a lot of sense. Green Bay at pick 23. This was a little tougher for me. I think Kenneth Grant could be the guy. Certainly, I think they could use some defensive line help both in the interior and from the edge. But Jahdae Barron, I think, is a fun prospect, and I think he's the type that could end up being a real premium lockdown corner. I see a lot of Quinyon Mitchell in him, not necessarily the way they play, but just in that grit factor. And I think that could be fun for Green Bay. Minnesota at pick 24. For me, I was stuck between quite a few picks here. I think Malachi Starks, ranked as the 17th prospect here, could slide a little bit. Kenneth Grant could also be a pick here. Derek Harmon, I think, could reasonably be a pick here. I could also see them going on the offensive side of the ball. I think Matthew Golden's a top end talent, and you add him to a really talented wide receiver room already with Jordan Addison and obviously Justin Jefferson. But at the end of the day, I think when you have a young quarterback, because I'm assuming they're going to end up playing JJ McCarthy for most of the season, if not all of the season, what's a great way for to help a young quarterback succeed? When you already have a great offensive line, when you already have great skill positions, it's getting him the ball back. Malachi Starks being in that defensive backfield, I think could help with that, certainly. Houston at pick 25. This one's interesting for me. I think CJ Stroud, I commented on him having a rough season. I think it was also largely impacted by the fact that the interior of that offensive line really broke down as the season went on. Adding a guy like Tyler Booker that I think is going to end up sticking at guard, I think is an interesting prospect. They've really gone defense in recent drafts. I think they have offensive skill position players, and I could see them getting a guy like Matthew Golden, especially with Tank Dell being hurt, Stephon Diggs being older, and if I'm not mistaken, a free agent, and Nico Collins being, having an injury history. I could see them going receiver, but I think more importantly, they need to keep CJ Stroud upright and get his confidence back. I think Booker's a good pick there. The Rams, they are interesting as well. I think Matthew Golden is intriguing for them. I mean, they're seemingly moving on from Cooper Kupp. I think that could be a spot for Golden to really find a role behind Puka Nacua in that offense, and with Tutu Atwell there and such. But I think they go offensive line here. They bring Stafford back. I part of me just really wants to click Jackson Dart, and I could see them trading out of this pick if the team is desperate for Jackson Dart, but I'm not going to do that here. I think Josh Connerly from Oregon makes a lot of sense, and you stick him at tackle. He's a guy that I think could stick at tackle and not move inside, unlike most of these prospects. I think he's a great pick for the Rams here to help protect Stafford. Baltimore pick 27. There's a lot of guys here who I like for the Ravens. Um, I think really a guy like Iman Wari to pair with Kyle Hamilton is a lot of fun. I think he's incredibly athletic. He's a guy that could really help out that defense. Feels like a Jim Harbaugh guy, in my opinion. I think that's where they end up going, the safety out of South Carolina. Detroit at pick 28. Listen, Detroit loves their Michigan guys. Kenneth Grant sitting here, who I think is probably a higher prospect than being picked here at 28, really impact that defensive line as you get Aiden Hutchinson back. Um, I think could be a fun selection. I am debating other picks here, but I think that's where they end up going if these are the options. Washington at pick 29. This is maybe where I think Matthew Golden stops. I stop saying, hey, this would be a good pick, but maybe not. I think they need another wide receiver here, even with the addition of Deebo Samuel. I I I want to quell expectations with Deebo Samuel just a little bit. There's a reason he went for a fifth round pick, and partially it's because Washington's paying his salary, but also partially because I think Deebo's past his prime. And the number one wide receiver here is clearly Terry McLaurin. Past that, it's who? It's Luke McCaffrey. It's whoever else. I don't know. But adding Deebo Samuel is an upgrade over those guys, which is why I think it was a good move. However, that doesn't mean there's no need at wide receiver. And adding a guy like Matthew Golden, now all of a sudden he's only asked to be your wide receiver three, maybe your two if Debo's not as good as you hope he's going to be. I think it's just another offensive weapon for Jaden Daniels to take advantage of. And now you're looking at three exciting pass catchers. And, one early in his career, one later in his career, and one in the prime. I think that's a fun staggering there for Jaden Daniels and that offense and Cliff Kingsbury to take advantage of. Buffalo Bills at pick 30. I could easily see them go defensive line here. I could easily see them trading out of this pick, especially if a team is desperate for a quarterback. The problem is the team that I think is most desperate to get up into this spot is the New York Jets, and Buffalo's certainly not trading with them. I could see them going for a guy like Siobhan Ravel Jr. I talked about Quinyon Mitchell earlier with a comparison point. Siobhan Ravel is kind of rising like Quinyon Mitchell did. Now, I predicted the Quinyon Mitchell rise during the season last season. I said when he was going like second round, mid second round, I was saying I think he's going to make his way up, and he ended up going pick 20 to the Eagles, and looks like a stud. I don't know that Siobhan Ravel is that type of prospect necessarily, but I could see him rising up the board, kind of similar to Quinyon Mitchell did. Even though I don't believe in his talent as much as I did Quinyon Mitchell, I thought Quinyon Mitchell was going to be a stud. I think Ravel could be. I'm not saying anything. He certainly could be. I haven't watched enough East Carolina to really say either way, but I certainly think Buffalo could be in love with that pick here. Pick 31 for the Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, in my notes, I had them taking Derek Harmon, and I certainly think that could be the way to go. They could not get pressure on Jalen Hurts in the Super Bowl, and I think that really showed. Even though they stopped Saquon Barkley, that passing attack being lethal, and Patrick Mahomes making too many mistakes is what cost them. However, Kansas City has been known to go get the guy that they want. If they want to trade up, they'll trade up with Buffalo, and they'll go get a guy like Xavier Worthy. In the same vein, I think they could trade out. And so in that prediction episode, I did have the Jets starting Tyrod Taylor. I did have them drafting Jackson Dart. And the pick was 31. So I'm staying true to that here. I think the Jets end up hopping up here with the Kansas City Chiefs. And this is taking a while to load. I'm a little concerned. Um, they have pick 42, so it's not exactly a huge drop back. I do think it takes at least a fourth this year and at least a third next year. And I know this is going to say it's uneven. I think this is a slight overpay, but if it's the franchise quarterback, it's the franchise quarterback. So I'm just going to do, I don't think this fourth and this fifth are going to be tacked on, but I'm going to do enough to make this allow the pick trade. I think the Jets get moving up here. They get up to 31 and they take their guy, which in this case, if this loads, this is starting to be concerning. NFL mock draft database simulator, I beg of you, please let me make this trade so I can get the Jets a quarterback. If fate does not want the Jets to have a franchise quarterback, well, we're not going to trade it because it's just not working. But you can imagine what's happening here. Obviously, I'm not with the Kansas City Chiefs taking Jackson Dart. The Jets are taking their quarterback of the future. They're starting Tyrod Taylor and certainly starting Jackson Dart during the season at some point when Tyrod Taylor gets hurt. Philadelphia Eagles at pick 32. I'm staying chalk here. Jihad Campbell, I think if they lose Zach Bond in free agency, which I think is a realistic possibility, adding a linebacker with the type of top end talent that Campbell comes with could certainly be a wise addition. So that's our first round mock. We will save the results here so we could preview them. Obviously, one trade here involving the New York Giants moving up 2 picks, but also the Jets trade that's not listed here. So 2 picks, 2 trades involving the two New York teams. Have the Giants taking Cam Ward, Titans trading back, taking Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders going to the Las Vegas Raiders. Tyler Warren ends up being a weapon for the New Orleans Saints and Kellen Moore offense. The Bears protect Caleb Williams like they desperately need to do. The Cowboys get an offensive weapon. So do the Colts in a surprising way. The Falcons finally get an edge rusher that starts kind of a run here of edge rushers. A lot of fun. Emeka Egbuka goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers and adds a weapon to that offense. Same with Colston Loveland and the Chargers. Geesh, I could see Justin Herbert having fun with him. Impact defenders in the NFC North and in the AFC North. Matthew Golden adds a weapon to Washington. And the Jets end up getting their franchise quarterback. My favorite pick. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think any of this is realistic? I could see a guy like Jackson Dart end up going significantly higher, by the way. I want to say that. If the Jets end up getting antsy, I could see them taking him at 7, even though I'd be so scared of that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What pick do you think made sense? What pick do you think was ridiculous? I appreciate any comments. Let me know. Follow the socials if you haven't already. Subscribe on YouTube. I appreciate the support. Every link's in the description, so follow over there. Thanks for the support. Thanks for watching. Peace out.